Earlier this week, the feud between Israel and Hamas intensified. Israel retaliated against Hamas with airstrikes on Gaza after Israel said the militant group hit a house near Tel Aviv with a rocket. Egypt has tried to play the role of mediator in all of this. These clashes come as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu seeks re-election next month. Mr. Netanyahu is trying to secure a fifth term in office. For more on all of this, I spoke with David Pollack of the Washington Institute. I asked him what's causing this uptick in violence.
I think you can speculate about a number of different factors, and I would say they're not mutually exclusive. They probably all play a part. So number one is that Hamas in the Gaza Strip is trying to take people's minds off the fact that for the first time ever in the last 12 years since it took over the Gaza Strip, there have been popular protests against Hamas among the people of Gaza over economic issues and corruption and the suffering that those people are enduring because of Hamas's misrule. So there were really very significant protests and very brutal repression of those protests by Hamas against their own people in the Gaza Strip, against the Palestinians who live there. And now, I think in order to divert everybody's attention, whether it's the Palestinians themselves or the rest of the world, from the internal problems that it faces in Gaza, Hamas is setting off some rockets and missiles against Israel, hoping that that will change the conversation in its favor. And that's number one. Number two is the upcoming Israeli election on April 9th. And I think that Hamas might be calculating, I think it's wrong, but this might be their calculation, that they can get away with this because Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, and his government, only 2 weeks before a crucial national election that's up in the air, right? The results are not clear from all the polls that we see. Hamas is kind of figuring that they're going to be inhibited from responding very forcefully because they're worried about an escalating conflict with Hamas right on the eve of an Israeli election, which might be kind of politically risky for them. I think that's the Hamas calculation, but I think it's very badly mistaken.
Could the United Nations get involved at all?
Well, the United Nations often tries to get involved in this, and we've already had some people or diplomats, representatives in the United Nations call for some kind of action or at least some kind of statement about it. And we've had the UN special representative to Israel and the Palestinians, who's actually a very good diplomat, issue a public call for restraint by both sides. But I would say that the United Nations really has very little credibility with either side, and it has no power whatsoever of enforcing any statements or any decisions, any recommendations that it might make. And as if that weren't bad enough, it's also I think objectively, you would have to say that because of the makeup of the membership of the UN, where there's 60 Muslim states and only one Jewish state, right? It's biased against Israel, and the record of the UN, I think, demonstrates that pretty clearly. So, unfortunately, given all of those problems, I really can hardly imagine that the UN can play much of a constructive role here.
You'd mentioned the Israeli elections coming up.
Right.
Prime Minister Netanyahu had just visited Washington to say hello to President Trump, who has had a very pro-Israel stance.
Yes,
we have he's recognizing Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, was also a big disputed a region. Right. How do you think President Trump's pro-Israel stance could benefit Netanyahu come election time?
I think it benefits him considerably. And I think you could say that this is actually a form of interference from the outside in an internal democratic process in another country. In this case, a friendly country, an ally of the United States, but still, it is a form of intervention in somebody else's internal politics. And I think that what you're seeing is, in a very close election, which this is shaping up to be, that kind of what amounts to, even if nobody officially calls it that, electioneering by the Trump administration in favor of the incumbent prime minister in Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, I think that could conceivably tip the balance in a close election in his favor.
As you heard, Mr. Pollack made a serious allegation against the UN. He claims it has an anti-Israel bias. I contacted the UN by email yesterday for a response. I haven't heard back yet. We're back in 2 minutes.